English class has, for a very long time, been about the test. And we're hoping through the bilingual policy to expand that need beyond the test, to actually use English in life.
I think the blueprint is pretty good, but when it comes into practice, I think most of the students in Taiwan were having a very hard time. I believe that schools would want to make their curriculums more English if they want to receive more budget.
Policy is not about making English the main instructional language. English is being incorporated as an enhancement to the Mandarin instruction happening.
Hello and welcome to Connected. I'm Divya Gopalan. Within the next 5 years, the government wants Taiwan to be what they call a more livable international environment by improving the level of English here. So they spearheaded the Bilingual 2030 policy, which aims to make many facets of life more friendly to English speakers living or working here. Now, with the clock ticking, we want to know whether the policy is on track and whether the education system is making the grade. And for this, we are joined by Keith Graham, Assistant Professor at National Taiwan Normal University School of Teacher Education, joins us from Taipei, and Josh Lee, also in Taipei, co-founder of EdYouth Student Association. Thank you both so much for being part of the program. I'm going to start with you, Josh. Firstly, tell us a little bit about your association.
So EdYouth is a student organization based in Taiwan, and our mission is to enlighten students' mind and deliver students' voice. So we hope that students could have a better understanding of the educational policy nowadays, and their voice towards educational policies could be heard.
Keith, speaking of educational policies, you're part of that ecosystem. Can you tell a little bit about your background and what you're doing here?
Yes, so I'm an assistant professor at National Taiwan Normal University, where I teach courses to pre-service teachers who will be the future bilingual teachers in Taiwan.
Right, so you've taught in various bilingual settings here in Taiwan. Can you tell us how developed the bilingual programs here are right now at schools?
Sure. So when we talk about bilingual programs in Taiwan, we can talk about those that are in the private school sector and those that are in the public school sector. Those that are in the private school sector have been around long before the 2030 policy. And so those programs are fairly developed. As for the public sector, we're at the beginning stages of establishing bilingual education. So some schools that have been implementing bilingual education for several years now are more developed than those that are starting for the first time. And there are success stories and there are schools that are struggling. But we at National Taiwan Normal University hope to give those schools that are struggling the support they need so that this can be done successfully.
I'm curious to know what your English learning journey was like. Was it within the formal system mostly, or was it something that was more informal, like cram schools, or trying yourself, spearheading your English learning?
I would say it's more of a dual track. So I do learn English at school, but mostly I do it through cram school, or let's say self-directed learning. So which means that when I was really young, I was put into the cram school by my mother. And the reason is that she find myself having very talented in English speaking, or let's say language speaking. So she believes that putting me into the cram school would help boost my English speaking skills and would allow me to have a better English command in the future. And as for self-directed learning, I think when I was equipped with basic English, let's say literacy, whether it's listening or reading ability, I'm able to learn through myself and to progress. So that I think that's a quick wrap for my English learning journey.
Right. So Keith, then in that case, tell us what the Bilingual 2030 policy is expected to achieve for Taiwan, given that from what we've heard from Josh about how a lot of his English learning was from his, encouraged by his family and his own motivation.
Yeah, so one of the things that Josh said that was interesting to me was he said that He attributed his English learning to cram school, and he attributed it to his own self-learning. But one thing he didn't necessarily say was he attributed it to his public school or private school learning in the traditional school setting. I think the Bilingual 2030 policy acknowledges that many students have struggled to learn English in the public school system through the English curriculum. And one of the reasons this is that oftentimes the public school system focuses on teaching about the English language and not as much on how to use it. To really be able to use a language, there has to be elements of meaning-focused input and meaning-focused output, which I think in many cases has been absent from the school system up until this point. So the Bilingual 2030 policy hopes to add those missing components. We don't necessarily need English teachers to change what they're teaching because what they're teaching is important. But the bilingual policy opens it up now to other classes where they don't necessarily have to focus on the mechanical aspects of the language. What they will shift their focus to in these other subject areas is using the language for communication, focusing on meaning.
So, Josh, we've heard Keith there talk about the bilingual policy and then what it looks like within the education system. But can you tell us what you found most difficult about learning English or becoming a fluent English speaker here in Taiwan? Not necessarily just within the system, but in general, the whole environment here.
So I would say that it is very hard to become a good English speaker if you want to learn through merely the educational curriculum system right now in Taiwan, because students may not feel that they're supportive enough to speak this language. Probably they know how to read, they know the grammar, they know how to use the lexical resources, how to expand them, but they may not have the ability or opportunity to apply the language into use. And I think that is a main reason that I did not mention the work from public schools through my English journey.
You make a very interesting point, and I want us to take you somewhere else, maybe another part of the world, Malaysia in particular, which has a multicultural society and ranks quite highly in English speaking in the world rankings. Now, in Malaysia, policies like Taiwan's Bilingual 2030 have been in place for many years, and they've gone through many changes over time. Our reporter Brian Cragen spoke to a group of Malaysian students living in Taiwan about their learning experiences and the difficulties they face in their English journeys in Malaysia.
For me, it's an extra burden because I need to memorize two languages in like technical terms of the concept. So it's like I need more time to prepare the exam because I need to prepare in two languages. So it's a burden for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's quite a burden, especially when I started from primary school, because the Chinese teaching classes and the English teaching classes, like in both math and science, is the separate classes. So we need to like memorize both terms and maybe changing our mindset to adapt the learning process of both subjects.
So you need to actually memorize two things for like two answers for one question, something like that, in two languages. Yeah, and some of the time their standard answer might different. Yes, so you feel like you are dealing with the system, not actually the language. It's like a lot of mess happening. Yeah.
And you can watch the full version of that roundtable on our YouTube channel or the TaiwanPlus website. I think one of the advantages Malaysia has is that it's a multicultural society. And Josh, as you said, there is the opportunity to use the language on a daily basis with the various different parts of the population. Now, Keith, I do know that you did want to respond to some of what Josh said first before we kind of move on into that situation we've seen in Malaysia. Please do.
So Josh pointed out that students in Taiwan tend to excel in listening and reading and maybe struggle in some of the productive skills of language, such as speaking and writing. And I think as we talk about the Bilingual 2030 policy, it's important to acknowledge that the policy document explicitly states that the goal is about output. It's about speaking and writing. And so the hope is that as we implement bilingual education throughout the school system, students will have more opportunities to speak and write. Because to learn a language, you need two things. You need exposure to the language, and you need a need for the language. And as you said in the case of Malaysia, there may be more of a need in that multicultural, multilinguistic society. Our bilingual policy is trying to create that here in Taiwan as well, trying to create opportunities for students where they need to use English in different domains of their academic life.
So right after what the professor has said, I believe that it is a very beautiful blueprint of having students being able to speak and to write whatever they want in English, and through other subjects, they could apply English as a medium to learn instead of merely a language. When it comes into practice, I think most of the students in Taiwan were having a very hard time on the basic reading and listening. They think that sometimes the teachers cannot deliver a really good instruction, or the curriculum itself is a little bit of flaw, so that students in Taiwan may not be able to focus so much on the English curriculum nowadays. So that if you ask, have you ever slept in your school's English lesson? I think probably half of the students would say yes for this question.
Keith?
A couple things. First, I think it's very important to acknowledge that, especially when we're talking about before university, anything high school, junior high school, elementary school, that this policy is bilingual. It is not English medium instruction. And I think that sometimes gets lost in the media. Politicians, representatives of different organizations will often say that we're doing English medium instruction, and that's only necessarily true at the higher education. And so to get into a little bit more of the details about what the Ministry of Education expects, for primary and junior high school, their expectation is that main content knowledge will continue to be taught through Mandarin, and that English will be added into extension activities. Now, to be honest, that may not be happening in all schools in Taiwan right now. Because teachers may not be clear about the expectations or may not be clear about how to do this. But the ideal situation is that students will continue to learn in Mandarin in these subject classes, and that English will be incorporated into extension activities, where they will take the knowledge that they've learned in Mandarin and use the English that they have with some support to engage in some communication around that content. That is the ideal. That is what I teach to my students here, and that's what I teach with my in-service teacher programs as well. Now, one criticism I have of the policy is that implementation has outpaced our ability to train teachers to do what I just described. I feel confident that the teachers that attend my class and the classes of my colleagues are able to do this, but it's going to take time for us to be able to train everyone that needs to be able to.
Right, Keith, I'm so glad you brought up the Ministry of Education, because we put some of the concerns to them and they gave us a statement. Now, we asked about their policy on using English as a medium of instruction and teaching English courses completely in English, and this is what they told us. They, quote, will gradually encourage English teachers in primary and secondary schools to reduce the time spent using Chinese in English classes in order to increase students' time exposed to English. As for other subjects, the MOE emphasized a non-compulsory bilingual teaching approach that will only be introduced in primary and secondary schools that are willing and ready to implement such programs, and that, quote, teachers should employ a bilingual approach in Mandarin and English adapted to the language abilities and comprehension levels of students in the class, adding that this should not involve exclusively teaching in English or excessively emphasizing the proportion of English integration. Keith, back to you. It feels like a lot of the responsibility falls to the schools and teachers in letting them decide how or whether these policies are implemented. Does this flexibility actually work?
Absolutely. If the school knows how to leverage that flexibility. We promote a framework called Fertile. It was designed by the Vice President of the School of Teacher Education, Professor Lin Zibing. And the first letter of Fertile, F, stands for flexibility. Understanding that bilingual education is going to look different in each school. Bilingual education is going to look different in each subject area. And through our training, we help the teachers and administrators, because many principals attend our trainings as well, to understand how context can change the way that we practice it, and that bilingual education throughout the school is going to look different.
Okay, so Josh, recently, I'm going to dial back a little bit here, and recently teachers and students spoke out about the use of English as the main language of instruction for other subjects and how it could hinder both the appetite for English learning and the students' ability to progress academically. Josh, your association was part of this. Why?
I think that a main concern is that we hope language learning, or we say learning knowledge, is equal, which means that language should not be a barrier when you want to acquire a new skill or learn a new subject in school. I understand that the fertile thing and having flexibility is a very beautiful, let's say, blueprint, we say. But back to school, we see that if you have bilingual lessons, if you have bilingual classes, if you are more adhering to the of the Ministry of Education, you will receive more budget. I think that is how we see in practice. So that I believe that schools would want to make their curriculums more English if they want to receive more budget. I think that is something that I would like to mention, and we see and we discussed with the teachers union.
Right, Josh, the MOE, going back to that statement, mentioned not emphasizing excessively English integration. Now, does this match the experiences you've heard from students?
Some, but not necessary. I think what it's in real life is that there are students that may not be able to accept probably half of parts of English is used in another subject because it would directly reduce their learning interest or learning motivation in that particular subject. However, on the contrary, for those who are already having a great interest or motivation in learning English, they would gain more interest or motivation in learning a new subject because they believe that English is something that they could excel, so that they could use the so-called language barrier to win another student.
Your thoughts, Keith?
I think we need to be very careful about saying that English is the main instructional language, because that is not the goal of our bilingual policy at pre-tertiary levels before university. Mandarin remains the main instructional language when bilingual education is being practiced correctly. Now, not all schools have realized that. It's taking time to educate each school to understand that this policy is not about making English the main instructional language. English is being incorporated as an enhancement to the Mandarin instruction happening. The second thing is that I think the experiences at each school are going to be different. So, we can share positive stories and we can share negative stories. One story that I'd like to say, particularly in regard to English motivation, is my colleague who teaches physical education courses to pre-service teachers here at National Taiwan Normal University. He shared that that teacher said the students in her class said they really like the bilingual PE class, but they really dislike their English class. And one of the reasons they said is because in the PE class, they can feel free to use English without being criticized for not being perfect. And it's the first time that they've had that experience. Whereas in the English class, its focus is accuracy. And so they feel less motivated in those cases. Now, of course, that's anecdotal evidence, but it does provide some support for what we're trying to do here. We're trying to provide positive experiences for students with English in a situation where many of them may have been in situations where accuracy has been overemphasized, causing them anxiety and a lack of motivation.
Now, that brings up so many other points that we should talk about. One of them would be the whole idea of this testing, like this constant English testing and reaching a certain level, and how that actually translates into speaking ability. But before I go to that, I want to ask Josh, what are some of Edu's suggestions on how Taiwan can improve the implementation of teaching English or effectively teach English with students having so many varying levels of proficiency within one class itself?
I think one major point that I would like to echo Professor Keith is that we have to recognize that in the school nowadays, some students might not feel comfortable making mistakes in the English curriculum right now. So instead of enhancing the let's say bilingual lessons or classes in other fields of study or subjects, probably we should first talk about how we could allow the English teachers in Taiwan to teach in a more interactive and more innovative manner. I think that is the first thing first that the Ministry of Education should do. And secondly, we have to also recognize that English is actually a language or a subject where we could see a social structure or hierarchy in the school. The people who have a better cultural or economic background might be more able to ace this language in their tests or assessments. However, for those who not have a really decent background, they might find this language challenging. So for those who do not have due resources in the past, we should give them more in schools and in policies.
That is a very, very important and critical point there. And I'm going to move this back to the whole idea of testing again. Now, Keith, according to the TOEIC, the test of English for international communications, in 2023, the listening and reading scores of Taiwanese test takers had improved 30 points compared to a decade ago. Have you seen this reflected in the overall English proficiency in Taiwan?
Certainly. I think most people would recognize that the students that come to our university today are able to communicate in English better than the students of the past. In terms of the policy, we do need to recognize that there are several parts. There is the English part for English class, and there is the part for other subjects. And the policy does try to improve both ends. So I think there are efforts to try to improve the teaching methods and the manner in which English classes are being conducted in Taiwan, and then to enhance that with the English in the subject areas. And in terms of testing, again, I think this is one of the values of implementing the bilingual education policy here in Taiwan, because English class has, for a very long time, been about the test. Returning to what I said earlier about exposure and need, the need has always been the test here. And we're hoping through the bilingual policy to expand that need beyond the test, to actually use English in life. For students, that means English in their life in schools. And then hopefully, once they leave the schooling system, English in their professional lives.
So, Josh, we're running out of time here, but I kind of want to end with you and this whole idea of beyond the test, the use of English. What would being proficient in English do for you and your peers? How is that going to change or elevate your life? And is it absolutely necessary?
I think one point that I would like to bring is that English is very useful in Taiwan in terms of exams and assessments, because if you ace English, you could probably ace everything. Let's say now I am also a National Taiwan University political science student in the 3rd grade, and a lot of literatures that we are reviewing now is in English. So language would not be a barrier for me comparing with other peers and students in NTU. I think that is one major point. And the second thing is that you could be more connected with the international community. Like, I don't think that a lot of students in my age, in my grade, would be able to be connected on TaiwanPlus. I think I really cherish this opportunity and moment to put myself into such environment and be more connected with friends from home and abroad.
I love that. And with that, we're going to have to end this conversation. Thank you so much, Keith Graham, Assistant Professor at National Taiwan Normal University School of Teacher Education, joining us from Taipei, along with Josh Lee, co-founder of EdYouth Student Association. And for our viewers everywhere, it has been good to have your company. If you've enjoyed today's episode or have anything you'd like to add to the dialogue, do join the conversation on our social media. And remember, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay connected.